you ever wanted to have a conversation with a neurodevelopmental specialist, pediatrician specialist at that? I have. And guess what? That's what we're going to do today. We're going to have a conversation. I'm very happy to have you here, Ian, and I am excited to hear what you have to tell us. I myself spent 30 years in education as a teacher and as an administrator. And so you are kind of on the other side of the ADHD diagnosis, because the diagnosis comes from, the doctors, and then we try to help the kids in school. So tell me more about what you do. I'm really excited to hear.
So thank you, Jenny. Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited to talk about a subject that I'm very passionate about. So what I do, and so I'm a pediatrician and I trained as a general pediatrician, a hospital pediatrician, but I got interested in children's neurodevelopment. I got more satisfaction from actually not just seeing children one-off and in the hospital when they're ill, but had the opportunity to actually be part of the child's journey. So gave me an opportunity to actually understand children, see them, be able to reason and see how their minds work and their behaviors, because behaviors in children tell you a lot of things. It communicates a lot of things to you. So I was able, and I then took an interest in that aspect of study, just studying children's development, the brain processes, how it works. I also do some neurology in terms of epilepsy and children with chronic neurological disorders. So I see lots of children with seizures when I see them in hospital. But I particularly became interested in how children's behaviors and how sometimes children who were thought to be naughty actually had reasons for their behaviors. And because of that, I took further interest in that, specialized in that more. And I've been practicing and assessing children for the past over 20 years. And I found it really rewarding because I've been able to be part of that journey with a child when they come in, when things are extremely difficult, and actually going through the journey that when you understand them and understand what their needs are, you can actually inform and educate people around them. Actually, parents then have an understanding and be able to work with them better, and also helps to educate people at schools on how to work with them. And I've seen children evolve from what seemed like, well, that child can't do anything, can't succeed, to children who have actually done their best and become, the best version of themselves, and be happy because they actually got the support they needed. So yes, so I see children with ADHD, autism spectrum disorder, tic disorders, motor coordination disorders. But as you know, ADHD and autism spectrum disorders have become very, very common. Increasingly, the prevalence has increased, the need for assessments has increased. And so because of that, I felt we had to do more, not just do the diagnosis. So I do a lot of psychoeducation, educating people, other professionals. So I also try to support families as well in supporting children. So that's been good. And it was because of that I started the Early Intervention Matters podcast, which I run. And that's a platform for educating parents and people who come across, children with neurodiversity. Yeah.
Wow. That is so awesome because, we're on the same team, the teacher and the doctor,
Absolutely.
it's a hand in hand kind of thing. And
Absolutely.
I love to hear
Absolutely.
it from your side. I'm curious. I had to do a little exercise when I was in school about explaining ADHD to a kid. And I'm curious, how would you explain to a kid, I don't know, we'll say a 10-year-old, what ADHD?
So I usually love doing this in my clinic because I have different things that I use as props sometimes to explain to them. But one of the things I usually say to them in my clinic room is, they're sat in the room, they've come in, there's lights in the room and it's bright, they can see, they're not falling over because there's lights in the room and they can navigate their way around the room. But for that light to come on, there are processes that are gone on for that light to actually come on. So and then I ask the child, if you turn on the switch on the wall and the light doesn't come on, so what could happen, what could be the cause? And so they would say things like, it could be the socket, it could be the wires, it could be the bulb. And I said, yes, it could be either of those. And what happens if the light doesn't come on? They can't see properly what they're looking for. They can't see that. They would fall over. They would make certain mistakes. And so I said, that's the way our brains work. So all those wires that connect together to get the bulb to come on, it's a bit like the nerves in our brain, the neurons, because those neurons are carrying messages along the way to help that light bulb come on. And when the light bulb comes on, you can see things very well and you can do things that you want to do. So what happens in ADHD, there's a faulty transmission with those wires connecting. So the bulb doesn't come on because there's faulty wiring. And so what we can do to help the bulb, to make the bulb light, is either change the bulb or kind of do something to help the wires. And so that's what happens. So when you don't have the lights on, you would fall over, you would make mistakes, you would bump into things, you're not looking, and everything that can happen as a result of the lights not coming on. And they usually get that when I explain that way to them, because they can look at, similarities between the nerves and the wires. The other thing, because at that age, they love cars, they love fast driving cars. The other thing I say to them, I say, your brain is like a Ferrari. And it's a beautiful Ferrari, it's a lovely car. But what happens if your Ferrari doesn't have brakes? And they say to me, oh, that will crash. That won't be nice because it will crash and it will have bombs because there are no brakes. So I then say to them, okay, the brakes are really important for the car. Otherwise, we'll have lots of accidents. So the car may be so beautiful outside and have everything, but without brakes, the car would crash. And so our brains are like that. The brain with ADHD is like that. So it keeps going very fast. And if it doesn't have brakes, it's going to crash. So it could be the most beautiful car, the best car, but without brakes, it will crash. And they do understand. I've also had children come up with their own analogies of what their brains are, and that's really what's fascinating. And I always say to them, can I just borrow that? Because that's really exciting.
I always use the analogy of, imagine that you have all of this huge stack of letters that need to get all over every place. And you've got insufficient mailmen who don't know their job, or they're slow, or they get
Exactly.
distracted very easily, and they're
Yeah.
trying to get the mail to where you're supposed to go. That's one of my favorite ones.
Yeah, no. I had one from a child recently, which I thought was fascinating. And one of the things was that he wasn't going to sleep on time at night. Obviously, his brain is busy all the time. So his mom asked him, what's wrong? And he said, no, that he has all these bins in his head, which he feels he's got to fill them all. And because there are lots of bins which he needs to sort things out and put them in the separate bins. And when he finishes doing that, he'll then be able to switch off to sleep. So there was a night he said to his mom, I've run out of beans. I have to order another one from Amazon Prime. I thought it was hilarious, but it was just amazing how he'd managed to think through. He said, I've just ordered some from Amazon Prime and it's got to come, but that's why I still can't sleep, because I've exhausted all the beans in my head.
Oh my goodness, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's the joy of working with kids. They're so creative.
No, I love them. They're just amazing. I just love working with them. Yeah.
So I love to have a doctor sitting in front of me who can tell me in layman's terms, hopefully, what really is happening in the brain of a person with ADHD.
Okay. So our brains are such fascinating structures. And the interesting thing about the brain is that every section of the brain is doing a different function. So it's got its own section, and those functions are going on without us knowing that it's going on. So for example, we've got the part of the front of the brain called the frontal lobe, which is just above our the forehead area. So we've got our brains are made up of two sides. We've got the left and the right, but the most of the two sides have similar things. So in the front, just above our foreheads, we've got the frontal lobe. Now, that frontal lobe has lots of neurons like every other part of the brain, but the function of that frontal lobe is several things. One, it helps us to plan what we're going to do, organize, think about what we're doing, regulating ourselves, thinking about things that we do before doing it. So, and it also modulates motor activity as well. It helps with attention as well. So things need to be, so when somebody's talking to us, when we are in a room or in a classroom or someone is talking to us, those processes are happening automatically. So the message is going through, picked up by the nerve in the frontal lobe, it's communicating, telling you you need to listen. That behavior is not appropriate. So that's why we know what to do when we get to a place. We don't suddenly get up in the middle of a classroom or a meeting and start doing a dance or jumping because our brains are telling us, no, that's not right. You can't do that. It helps us to organize ourselves. It's constantly doing that. And the nerves are connecting one to, there's a connection between one neuron and the next. And the chemical bit at the end of the nerves is called neurotransmitters. And those neurotransmitters, there are different neurotransmitters for different parts of the brain. So, for example, the frontal lobe, you've got the two types of neurotransmitters called dopamine and noradrenaline. So those are the two main neurotransmitters. So they're like they're like little messengers. They're exchanged at the end of the nerves. It's almost like a relay race between the nerves. So I pass on this to you, you pass it on to the next nerve, then that's carrying the message. So things are working well when that is happening. So when you have ADHD, that transmission between the end of the nerves that's supposed to help that process is not happening the way it's supposed to happen. So what happens then is messages are lost. People become impulsive because they do not have the ability to regulate themselves. Your brain should be telling you that's not right. You shouldn't be doing that now. But because you've lost the signals that should be modulating your behavior, then you do things without thinking about it. So you get a thought, instead of thinking about, is that right to do? You just do it. And that's the impulsivity that comes in. You become restless because you can't modulate yourself to, settle, and then you struggle with being attentive. So you lose focus, you're very distractible. And because those neurotransmitters as well are not functioning the way they should be. Now, ADHD itself results from several factors. So ADHD, the combination of inattention, hyperactivity, and impulsivity is the combination of that when the symptoms are present in enough numbers to cause impairment. So it's not when you just have inattention, because many of us will get inattentive at some point. We are not 100% focused all the time. But if we have those symptoms that are impairing us so much that we can't do the things we need to do, so if we've got some work that we need to do, instead of being able to sit down and focus and concentrate, we're all over the place. And so that affects the work that we're doing. So we then have lots of things that we should be doing. We can't do it. We fall behind in our work. So the children fall behind in their work. They lose information. So in the class, the teacher is teaching and they're losing focus. So they're not retaining that information. And then they're impulsive. They're doing things they shouldn't be doing. They're working out of the class. They're talking to their mates. They're shouting out. They're blurting out things. And that's because of lack of regulation as a result of that imbalance that's gone on. And there's several reasons why you get the brain in that state. So the commonest cause is genetic. ADHD is highly genetic in families, and it's not uncommon that we have a child that comes in to have a diagnosis and the parents recognize all the symptoms in themselves. And so we've had parents saying, oh, where can I get assessed? I can recognize all these things in myself. And so it's highly genetic. Or they say, oh, no, that's exactly his dad. I mean, it's always hilarious when parents are in clinic and I say, is there any family history? The mother looks at the father.
I taught 30 years and I didn't recognize it in myself. I wasn't diagnosed until I was 50 years old after I'd been teaching special education my whole life.
Yeah.
And then my husband has it and both of my kids have it. And my mother was diagnosed at 79 years old.
You see, but that's really good because I always have people thinking, 50 something, now I'm 60, it doesn't matter. No, it matters.
It
You
does
know, I say to
matter.
people, it does matter, because when you look at the impairment in functioning that the person suffers as a result of not having had the diagnosis, and just the life changing bits that you know that, well, this is what is wrong with me. I wasn't going mad. And this kind of explains it is life changing. So, yes, it is highly genetic. But there are other reasons why people may have ADHD. And so, for example, if the child was born preterm or had brain injury or had an infection in the brain, anything that could have affected those frontal lobe areas that we're talking about in the brain, or if a child had trauma that affected that part of the brain, the child could also have ADHD. And we have children with some genetic disorders where there are chromosomal deletions and things where, because of that deletion, it's affected the brain in such a way that that part of the brain is not functioning as well. So when you get impairment as a result of those symptoms, then you know that that person is not meeting their potential. They could do a lot better without all those difficulties, and that's what you refer to as ADHD.
So it's interesting to me, and I know that your definition is different in the UK than it is here in the United States. We have our DSM, which is our diagnosis for mental or so in our definition, we do not include emotional dysregulation as part of our definition, which I think is, it's crazy because you guys do, right?
We do. We use the DSM. So we've got the ICD-10, which is quite, it's still in, being waiting to renew to ICD-11. But actually, we use the DSM as well in diagnosing. But yes, emotional symptoms is a huge component. And I think they're looking at, by the time the DSM is going to be reviewed again, when it's going to be updated, I think the emotional symptoms will come in, because we've been talking about emotional symptoms for a long while. I mean, I used to come to the States regularly for the American Academy conference, and there was always that knowledge that, the emotional symptoms are a huge part of ADHD. And we see it. We see that in the children. When you treat them, when you see that dysregulation, that emotional roller coaster being improved as well with treatment.
Yeah, and so I find it interesting. I've had a few debates with people that I know, and I don't know what the right or wrong answer is as far as with the DSM, because it says in there that it has to have a significant negative impact on your life, right? At different times of your life, you might not actually meet those qualifications to be considered ADHD, but what's happening in your brain doesn't stop happening. So do you still have ADHD? So medically and the DSM are two different. So I'd like you to speak to that a little.
Yeah. So this is usually, in fact, what you're raising is a very common scenario that happens. And that's why I'm one for looking at the impact on the individual, because many times if you've got to rely on the very rigid way in which assessments are done, because a child might be looked at as, oh, no, he's fine, so he's not meeting the threshold. But actually, for that child, they are showing impairing symptoms. They might not just be hitting the threshold for, what DSM is listing out. So when I do assessments, I actually take, and this is quite interesting, I speak to the children a lot and I get their view of whatever is going on, because what's happened is when these guidelines are being written, a lot of them haven't actually gotten the perspective of the person actually going through the symptoms. And so you find that a lot of these things have been written with, just people sitting down. People have to sit down and create guidelines, but I keep saying a guideline is a guideline. It doesn't replace what that individual person, child, or adult feels. And I see this a lot with the teenagers, where they could look, people say, oh no, they're fine and all that, but when you then go in and explore those behaviors in detail, you would see that they're really impaired. And we see a lot of young girls who are so functionally impaired, by their ADHD symptoms, and they are so upset and they become depressed and anxious because they've got no way of being. And somebody looks at them, so no, they've just got anxiety, they've just got depression. But people don't understand that the root cause of the issues were the ADHD that they were experiencing. So you see many of them being put on antipsychotics and anxiety medication for years before it actually dawns on someone. Can we just explore this? Can we just take it a step back? And that's why a lot of girls are underdiagnosed. And because people, oh no, it's all emotional symptoms, whereas actually the underlying that is, a lot
Yeah,
of ADHD.
absolutely. Another thing that I got when I was in school, I was very emotional, right? I had a lot of emotional dysregulation. When I was a teenager, it was often just simply said, well, are you on your period? It's like, it's not hormones. But seriously, because like you get that, and a lot of times when a girl gets emotionally dysregulated, or when a girl is having some struggles that may be associated with mental health and those types of things, a lot of times it can be disregarded very quickly to being
Yeah.
adolescent hormones.
Yeah. Yes, everything is usually couched on it's the hormones, it's the hormones. And yes, it's happened a lot. I've seen quite a number of young girls. I mean, there are times when I've just said it's quite interesting. There's a young girl that I'd been seeing for a few years, and she had a lot of emotional symptoms. And when we explored it further, what had happened is she'd been seen by other professional psychiatrists, and they'd all say that's all emotional. No, she doesn't meet the threshold for ADHD assessment, so she kept being rejected and all that. She was getting more stressed. She was getting more down in herself because it was really impacting her work. And so, we did the assessment. I gave her the diagnosis because when I sent the forms to school, although the school hadn't flagged things up initially, but there were things they were writing, and I was saying, actually, you are writing a total description of somebody with ADHD here, but it's never occurred to anyone to flag it up that actually could this be ADHD? So she's done well. She's done really well. She's gone on treatment. She's done absolutely well. She's a happier young lady.
That's
And
awesome.
I just felt we're having lots and lots of young people like this.
Well, and let's talk a little bit about that when the school's saying they're fine and all the things point to ADHD, that they're not fine. And I know that I worked with kids who were so bright that their dysfunction brought them down to average, right? So what is your take on that?
Absolutely. This is my greatest battle all the time is that I would see a child in the clinic. I would do my diagnostic history, and I love talking to children because I like finding out what they think in their brains, and I like them telling me in their own words how they define things. And it's amazing what comes out when children actually describe things in their own words, just using simple language and being able to explain to you. And I would go through the history from parents and all that. And I would say, look, I just think, we're dealing with possible ADHD here. We'll send the same forms to the school. Oh, no. So he's doing fine. Yes, so many times I've had to get information from other sources. So if that child is going to other clubs, other activities, other people that know the child, I get information from as many sources as I can. I also use the quantitative test, the QB test, where the continuous performance testing, where the
Mhm.
child does some activity, because I feel I need to gather information from as many sources as possible. I do also request school observations from ADHD specialist nurse, and it's amazing that a teacher would say the child is fine. The specialist nurse goes into the school to observe the child and picks up on all the symptoms happening. So, yes, I think that, and I always say, if a parent is giving you an information, I think you should, the parent is with that child a lot of the time.
Mhm.
So, if that child is displaying certain behaviors, I think we need to listen to them and try and clarify and explore. So when they say no, it doesn't happen, if I feel that there's something that I still keep going chasing and all that, because we find that a lot of teachers and they don't understand ADHD.
No.
They don't understand neurodiversity. A lot of them are only beginning to learn, and we do training for teachers. Myself and some colleagues, two of my colleagues, have a social enterprise called School Doctor, and so the reason why we did that was to bridge the gap between school and health professionals and parents, because a lot of parents were struggling to communicate what they were seeing. And also there was this gap between schools and giving us information. So we've run several training courses for teachers, for educators. We've sometimes gotten parents and the teachers together in a big training day, because we felt that people need to be aware of these symptoms and how they show up. So School Doctor is it's there. The website is www.school-doctor.com, and we have schools recognizing children, schools referring children to us to help with assessing, because we try and give them some discount when they're supporting children to come and to get an assessment, because the waiting list in the National Health Service is extremely long. So yes, we've had to do assessments that way. So that has been a good bridge to educate parents and to educate schools, but there needs to be a lot more education going on, because a lot of times many schools do not recognize the symptom and don't recognize it they would pick up the boy who's running around in the class, but the girl who is emotional, who is sitting back, they wouldn't pick her up. The girl who is inattentive and daydreaming would be seen as very quiet.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, I can't believe it. We are already coming to the end of our time. And it's been such a great conversation. I always like to ask one final question of my
Yeah.
guests so that you get the last word in. And so I would like to ask today, if there was one piece of information that you could give to teachers, one little nugget that you say, if they just knew this, what would that be?
I think one of the things that I would say is trying to look at the classroom setting that they're in, because there's things that they can do in terms of adjustments within the classroom, and not, to make that environment a more friendly, calmer environment for the child. So just looking into their classroom as well. And also, I would say to them, they should have an open mind. And so when their concerns raised about the families have come in and said, this is what is happening, this is what I'm noticing, they should have an open mind and be able to provide as much information to support a referral, because if they have the mind of there's nothing wrong with the child in school and they send that to the doctors, then that sometimes sways some assessments, and the doctors saying nope, there's nothing wrong in school, so the child is fine, and therefore does not make. So I would say teachers should have an open mind. If concerns are raised about the child, then they should they should look further and see whether there are any of the signs. But they should also get, knowledge and education on ADHD. And I think what you're doing is fantastic, Janine, because we're looking for more people to actually go out and spread the words in education. We can't make the diagnosis without the teachers. We can't make the diagnosis without school. So we need school to be on board with us in providing that information. And that's why it's always great when I see people from education actually championing this, because I think the more people in education that get to understand the presentation, the better. So you're doing a great job, and well done, and thank you for doing that.
Well, thank you for joining me today. This has been a fabulous conversation and I have learned so much. And I just can't tell you how grateful I am to have your voice, a voice that people are going to respect and people can hear and say that there's knowledge back there. There's some there, and getting the message out it's like you said, so important. Working hand in hand as teachers and doctors, it doesn't always look the same. I went
Yeah,
50 years without knowing that I had it, and it doesn't automatically mean you have to give special ed services or anything, but accommodations, things that you can do,
absolutely.
just knowing
Yeah.
that that it's there, and also knowing that it doesn't always look the way you expect it to. So
Exactly.
thank you so much for
Thank
helping.
you. Thank you. And thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. So thank you.
Absolutely. So, with that, if our butterflies on the wall who have been listening enjoyed our conversation, we always want to remind them to subscribe and come back and do all those good things. And we'll see you next time.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank